Also, like, when it's like, oh, MSG is bad, it kind of just like contributes to like this like weird junk food perception of Chinese food. And it's like, okay, we're all moving past that. Like, you know, Chinese food is like so much more varied, and it's not just like a greasy late night thing.
You're listening to the Taste Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Caitlin and Sarah Leung join me in the studio to talk about their long-running online food blog, The Woks of Life, which is now a cookbook. Oh my gosh, I've been waiting for this for a long time. Now, for anybody who has ever held a wok over high heat, The Woks of Life has likely helped you along the way. They've been a go-to resource for recipes and techniques and really answering your questions about Chinese cooking. I really loved catching up with Caitlin and Sarah and hope you enjoy this conversation. Sarah and Caitlin Leung, welcome to the Taste Podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having us.
I love having two guests. This is rare. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, we're a package deal. So.
You are. Well, you have two more that aren't here.
Oh, that's right. Technically, we're only half representation today.
Well, it's rare, and I want to get into the structure of the book and how you devised it. 4 authors, your parents, the 4 of you.
Yes. Against all the odds, we have come out the other side with a book and our family bond somehow intact.
So the 4 of you wrote this book. How do you divide the labor? How do you have 4 authors, and when 2 of the authors actually are your parents? How does that work?
So there are, first and foremost, I feel like the gorilla in the room is that we do argue and squabble a lot, right? So yeah. I think that there's like an upteenth amount of communication that goes on in our family, but honestly, like it wouldn't really work any other way. Like we all bring really unique contributions that are all very complementary. So I think like that goes for how we run our blog, The Woks of Life. It's about how we actually develop recipes and sort of the expertise that we bring into the kitchen and into the cooking techniques and different kinds of dishes that we like to cook. So my dad is very much more technical. Like he had a restaurant kitchen background. So he comes from a long line of Chinese chefs, and he really brings the heat on like Chinese American classic dishes and kind of those restaurant secrets. And then my mom is really more, she grew up in China actually. So she is a first generation immigrant to America. So she really has that strong connection back to China and more of that nuanced cultural knowledge of, the different provinces and different styles of cooking and, that deep respect for tradition as well. And then me and Sarah.
Yeah, where do you guys land?
Yeah, I know.
They seem like your parents have a lot of information, a lot of knowledge, and then the 2 of you.
Right. It's a huge wind up. I feel like
we're partially like the I mean, part of our job is to translate that, right? This like sort of a little of this, a little of that style of cooking that my parents employed growing up. I remember like in our cabinet we have this little sugar dish, and like in a lot of Chinese dishes you'll see like a little like a dash of sugar just at the end, just to kind of like give that like bit of contrast. And it was like a plastic spoon with the handle broken off in the sugar, and it's like, oh, my mom, I'm like, how much sugar? And my mom's like, just like roughly half of the spoon. And so like that kind of like cooking by feel approach is really how my parents cooked for us growing up. And when it came time to figure out like, okay, how do we make those dishes? How do we reproduce those dishes? It really became about my sister and I sort of like translating that generation's knowledge into recipes that felt like that were clear and that we could follow and that we could reproduce over and over. And as my sister and I have become recipe developers or developers of Chinese recipes ourselves, I feel like, sometimes we're looking for sort of like maybe the shortcuts or like, oh, like this like quicker and easier version, or can we do this in an Instant Pot, or ideas like that I feel like maybe just like bring sort of a slightly modern variation into dishes. But then also like we've learned so much over the last like almost 10 years of blogging that my sister and I too like will dig really deep into traditional recipes and techniques.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a historical background and backbone in your writing and in talking about some of the recipes that you do, the fusion, like Cantonese roast turkey and Chinese Italian feast of 7 fishes, right?
Yes.
You've done those.
Yes.
Those are fun. I mean, those are absolutely like maybe not what your parents are thinking about, but you're thinking about them.
Yeah, and I think it's also just like, you know, our family, right? Like our my aunt, my dad's sister, married an Italian, and so like that, our cousins do like a Feast of the 7 Fishes, like Italian American Christmas Eve dinner, and when they come over for Christmas, that's what we do.
Yeah.
And like maybe sometimes there's like a little bit of like a Chinese, like a salt and pepper squid in there or something, and yeah, I feel like. You know, that's what makes the Walks of Life kind of unique is, you know, with the 2 generations speaking together, and not just 2 generations, but also 2, like, you know, my dad grew up in upstate New York, mm-hmm. and my mom grew up in Hubei and Shanghai. Mm-hmm. And so to have those different perspectives all sort of wrapped up into one blog.
It's special sauce. It's super unique, and why I think a lot of readers and fans love your newsletter and your website. Caitlin, tell me, when you launched the website, mm-hmm. like back 10 years ago, was there a strategy? Did you have content strategy in mind? Or were you doing the basic food blogging thing where you're just like putting up stuff and seeing if it worked? Like what? Because I asked this because clearly right now you have a really great strategy. Like there's really amazing cadence, and mm-hmm. I, you know, coming from the world that we share, the food media world, it's great. Like it's really, 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 really well done. So like, tell me about the origins.
Yeah, I think in today's like world of food media, the pace really is so intense, and there's so much like content creation going on. So like from where we started, I'll say that there was always this like core DNA of like making sure that it was a family project, because we followed, you know, food blogs back in the day. Like we loved Smitten Kitchen. We were like mm-hmm. Pioneer Woman fans before she like had her Food Network show. So mm-hmm. we were definitely like, you know, we would log into our favorite food blogs every day and see if they posted something new. But, you know, at the time, there really wasn't a clear resource that was for Chinese American born like kids like us, basically, who wanted to learn how to cook Chinese food, traditional Chinese food, but sort of have it be a little bit more well packaged than like just my mom being like, oh, it's just a little this and a little that, and you know, here's what you do, and you'll know when it's ready.
No,
it's
you
like,
can't do that as like a recipe
right.
developer.
Like as a beginner, it's very difficult. So that was, you know, kind of where we started in terms of seeing like, all right, this is kind of something that potentially we could step into. And I think that the unique aspect of it always was that we were interested in doing it with our entire family, because so, you know, my 2 parents and me and my sister, because at the time, actually, we were always really close growing up, but we had kind of gotten split up because my parents moved to China for my dad's job. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of this really weird time in our lives where we previously like saw each other every day and were like super close, but, you know, being separated by, you know,
12 hours.
Yeah, exactly. Was an adjustment. So we kind of we were like, okay, we miss the food from home. We have no idea how to cook this food. So like, how can we, number 1, stay connected, and number 2, kind of also like translate this knowledge and like kind of me and Sarah begin to like learn how to cook Chinese food.
Right. And I think to answer your question more pointedly, there was no strategy. Like I think that when we started it, like if you go back to the sort of like earlier version of like the earliest blog posts, they read a lot more like mm-hmm. sort of like an early 2000s
like
kind of blog,
yeah.
right? Like where you're just kind of sharing your thoughts. They read like diary entries. And for me, starting the blog from a place of like, I just graduated college, I didn't have a job, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And for me, I used it as like a creative outlet. And I think as we started to sort of realize like, oh, there's actually an audience here who's like asking us questions and like, oh, do you have this recipe? Or my grandma used to make this. Like, do you know what that is? Like, as we started getting those sorts of questions, we realized like, okay, like we actually have an audience that trusts our opinion about, you know, or our quote like version of a certain dish. And I think that that's when we started sort of taking it a little bit more seriously and more like, okay, we're systematically recording some of these classics and we're just, you know, gonna sort of start taking it from like I mean, not to get it too in the weeds, but like from a keyword perspective, it's like, what is somebody going to search for in order to find this dish?
Right, like feathering, right? That might
or velveting.
Or velveting. Why do I call it? I call it feathering, which makes no sense. But velveting. Okay, so that's my version. But velveting is how I found you. I was Googling that. I remember Kenji had some recipe in his first book, and I was like, I don't quite understand it. So I Googled it, and it like found you guys.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I mean, I think that we take the questions that our readers ask us and they get directly translated into content. You know, where
Smart.
It's like somebody's like, oh, I don't really get that. And then we're like, oh yeah, we really should explain that. Like, let's write an article about that.
Yep.
Like just that.
That's
and,
good.
Yeah.
But I one quick thing is like, I feel like, you know, going back to this idea of like, it's all four of us. I think that we were kind of surprised, honestly, when people did kind of have that inherent trust in us but I do think it partially is because of it's that family aspect. Like we started out just wanting to like document our family's favorite recipes and like our go-to recipes. And I think like that's a very relatable thing. And like a lot of people saw themselves in that. And you know, part of that also is like, okay, we're trying to make this as easy to understand as possible, like for me and Sarah too. So like that's also something of like when we're explaining velveting, like it's all in service of like someone who's cooking at home who's like, oh crap, like did I do this wrong, or like is something going wrong? And like we try to like bake that into like how we write our recipes.
One more question about the actual business of Walks of Life. So first off, is it a business? Do you have full-time jobs in addition to it, or is it your job? And like backing up, this first part of the question is, when did you know it was a hit?
Yeah, so we definitely treat it as a business now. It's just gotten so big and it's taken up so much of our time. My sister and I now both work on it full time.
Sweet.
For several years, we were holding down the fort on full-time jobs and also doing this like on the weekends. Which was challenging.
A lot.
Yeah. So, we're definitely like in it now. And that's great. And I think that for me, when I first realized that it was like something was when I started to notice people in the comments like talking to each other.
Yeah.
Like they would ask each other questions, or like a commenter would be like, oh, like check out this recipe that they have. Like it's really similar. Like, you know, they would answer questions for us. And that was a moment where I was like, there's like a community. Like we have like a community here.
Absolutely.
Who's like, you know, who's on our blog, knows who we are, and like trusts our recipes enough to like suggest them to other people. That's when I felt
so
like
they call that hashtag engagement, right?
Yeah, exactly. Not to get too
all wonky, but
too businessy,
but it clearly. And then so this is your full-time job. And we'll get to the cookbook. Obviously, you're here to talk about your debut cookbook, which I love. But I want to know, is the business growing in other directions outside of the cookbook? Television, podcasts, any of that stuff? I'm just curious because, I mean, it's really, I respect it so much, running your own food media business. Hard to do. You're making it look easy.
Well, that's a big compliment. I think that... Yeah, I mean, the cookbook is obviously such a huge kind of like sigh of relief now that it's actually like done and it's you know, about to come out. But I think that we're all sort of, you know, it's kind of a tricky thing because it is the four of us that we kind of like, there are different things that like me and my sister could do. And then there are things that we could all do as a family. I think we're trying to get more into like video content. It's not like we're like, you know, we're not inking a deal with Food Network or anything like that.
Soon, like 6 months from now.
yeah. It's in the works. But I think just like people today just like want to see more in action of like how a recipe comes together. So there's just been such a big demand for that in general. So I think that's something that we're trying to branch more into. But
Cool.
yeah, I think honestly, we put so much into the cookbook that we're just like having a little breathing period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you should, and you should celebrate when you can, because these things don't come around every day. So celebrate. Okay, so I actually didn't find you from that velveting SEO moment. I actually found you from my friend Judith. My friend Judith is like the biggest fan. Shout out to Judith. And I texted her last night. I said, like, I got the Walks of Life here. She's like, oh shit, I love the Walks of Life. I love their site. I'm like reading it, the text right here. She has a couple questions. So I wanted to jump into Judith's questions before I get into a few of mine. Okay, fill in the blank. Everyone in the U.S. would be better off food-wise if blank were as widely available in the supermarket as milk and eggs, and people knew how to cook with them. Sarah, you want to take it?
Wow, that is
That's
a
a
good
good
one. I think vegetables. Just the variety of Asian leafy greens that are available in your average Chinese or Korean or Southeast Asian market. When I walk into a regular grocery store, or I'm limited to a regular grocery store, I'm looking at the vegetable selection and I'm just like, man, this is like really light. Like I'm either eating kale or I'm eating broccoli, and like that's like those are the options. And I think that I'm exaggerating, but like there's so many just like great ways to cook vegetables, and I feel like here in the US, like we see them as like this sort of side dish, like the thing that goes on the side,
salad,
right, the side of the main
beans
event,
on the side, yeah,
right. And when in Chinese cooking, they are like the main event. They're something to be cherished as much as the protein. So I think that like if everybody just ate more like delicious and could see how tasty.
But you're
they
right
could
in the
be.
book. You use the term lip-smacking vegetables found throughout China, and you're trying to replicate lip-smacking vegetables. And I like hung on that for a bit, and I thought about it. And so, what makes the vegetables in China, if you're going to visit your mom's family, what makes them different there? What makes this lip-smacking quality?
Yeah, I think it's high heat cooking is a big part of it,
Yeah.
right? You have that like wok hei element. And then part of it is just like, because the vegetable is the main event, like there might be meat in the dish, right? But it's like a small amount that's sort of like complement, like, a little bit of pork belly that's just, kind of creating that like little bit of like glistening richness that to like say like a cauliflower. And then from that, like you're like, wow, this cauliflower is like deliciously savory, but there's like maybe 3 ounces of meat in the entire
Exactly.
dish.
Right.
It's such a small amount, right?
Yeah.
It's for
But it
flavor.
makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And I think also like cutting it into smaller pieces, like it's just a more enjoyable like eating experience when you're not like gnawing your way through like a giant piece of broccoli, and it's like cut into like a bite-sized piece that you can pick up with your chopstick.
Right.
And that
Like
kind of-
knife, like the knife skills, and like knowing like, okay, what size am I cutting the vegetables? If I'm making a stir fry with different vegetables, what size and shape is each vegetable going to be, such that when I'm eating this dish, like I'm getting like the ideal textural experience. I think that
and that everything will cook at the same time.
And
Exactly.
Right.
It's the cooking.
Yeah.
Right. Cooking the wok, right? It's like it needs to cook evenly.
Right.
Yes.
And I think American kitchens tend to go with the big whole head cauliflower.
Yeah.
Big pieces of I mean,
Right.
they're so prominent, and love a whole cauliflower head.
Yeah.
But for stir fry, you gotta like really spend that time in the
Right.
kitchen, right? Chopping.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that thoughtfulness of like, how am I cutting this vegetable such that it's going to be its best in the final dish? I feel like that's like such a huge part of Chinese cooking.
There's so many great recipes, and I want to cover some specific recipes. I want to cover some of the chapters and some of the areas that you've focused on. But one recipe that jumps out, or more of a combination, is cabbage, pork, oyster sauce, and wine, and aromatics, of course, garlic, ginger.
Mm-hmm.
What is it about that combination? Like, I love cooked cabbage. I make this myself. Like, if I'm gonna stir fry, it's like definitely my go-to Napa.
Mm-hmm.
Always. What is it about this combination?
I was thinking about this earlier, and I feel like, okay, I'll say for pork at least, like I feel like pork is just like the king of meats. Like there's just something about pork that is so distinctive and
Mhm.
like it's like an irreplaceable flavor. Like, there's like vegan beef and there's vegan chicken, but like there's no vegan pork. Like it's just one of
So
those
well said.
things that like you
You can't
can't
do it.
like capture that lightning in a bottle. Like,
Yeah.
It's just its own thing. But I feel like, I don't know, it is an interesting question because, yeah, like there's like that trinity of like ginger, garlic, scallion. And like like when those flavors come together, it's just like harmony. And
And oyster sauce makes everything.
yeah,
See,
oyster
that's
sauce
the
is
kicker,
like,
right? Oyster sauce and pork, and then whatever leafy vegetable. It could be Chinese broccoli, it could be cabbage, it could be even like Brussels sprouts if you want to go in that direction. Something
Mhm.
about it. Oyster sauce is amazing.
Yeah. it
yeah,
is.
oyster sauce is very underappreciated.
Our grandfather, used to say, if you want to make it taste better, just add oyster sauce.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was his like little motto.
Sriracha has gotten the press, but like let's maybe put sriracha aside and
Yeah.
just like let's get oyster sauce in the
Totally.
conversation.
I completely
Yeah.
agree.
I want to talk about dim sum because you have a very extensive dim sum chapter, and I feel like I have questions about this because like we've got great dim sum in most cities.
Mhm.
Am I actually making these dishes at home, or is this just a way to like let us appreciate what goes into a dim sum meal and experience?
You're making them at home. Like this,
Love it.
these
Yeah.
recipes are doable, and you can make them at
Yes.
home. And
Strong statement.
that is something,
Sarah, thank
right?
you.
No, totally. And that is something that we, when we started the blog, we never thought like we would be able to replicate some of these dim sum items. Like it was like they were like in a black box, and we just like had no
Yeah.
idea.
What are
how,
some of them?
Like the taro puffs, we are really proud of that
Yes.
recipe in this book because they taste spot on, and that recipe was a challenge. It was a big
Yeah.
challenge for my dad to develop it. But he nailed it, and like they're delicious. And I think
Well, for people who don't know what they are, they're like
Right.
these wispy fritters of taro, and then inside it's this like molten pork filling, and like the wispy part is the trick,
right,
and that's the part where you kind of get psyched out at home. It's like,
but like
requires
I-
some alchemy.
For sure. I think that the key to a lot of these recipes is just knowing how to do it. Because like, for example, at dim sum, they have those like fried sesame balls.
Mhm.
They're like, so
Hard to get that architecture, hard to get that
Yes.
shape.
yes. And
Yeah.
that recipe took my dad maybe 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Because he was like experimenting. They were exploding in the oil. It was like, oh my gosh, like why
He
are they
had to take
exploding?
like a 2-year hiatus because he needed like a break.
I love
Yeah.
your dad.
And it was like, but then once you have that formula, once you know what you're doing, then it's like, oh, I can reproduce this every time, no problem.
Yeah.
And actually, some of the recipes are pretty simple. Like the first recipe in the entire book is my pork and shrimp shumai, and it's as easy as mixing a filling in a KitchenAid mixer, or you can mix by hand. Putting them, stuffing like thin dumpling wrappers and steaming them, and that's it.
Yeah.
And it's super simple and
Yeah.
tastes really.
And you have
really-
wrapper recipes, but I think you can say you could substitute.
Yeah, store bought is fine.
Store bought is fine if you can get it. Yeah.
Store bought
Back-
is ideal.
Back to fried dough, because fried dough in Chinese cooking to me, it's like a category, right? I feel like I really want to hear about it through the culture because it seems like it's not just a fritter.
Mhm.
It's like about the texture, right? It's about the explosion of
Yes.
texture and some flavor and oil.
Yes. It's about the layering of the dough. So
Yes.
like it's like how the dough comes together, yes, but then it's about like once it's made, like how you rest it and how you roll it out, how you like put it in a spiral and then roll it out again, and like all of those things kind of lead to this like, well, at least for something like a scallion pancake or like a bing or something that you have like
Mhm.
usually
I think
in
of
the morning.
Bing's right away. Like that's like its own category.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
all that stuff is like laminated gloriousness that just like when it hits the oil just like takes on a completely different characteristic. And I think like, yeah, like there's donuts and things like that, and like more what you kind of would expect when you think of the word like fried dough, or like a youtiao, which is like a fried like cruller. But I think like getting like the scallion pancakes and like the crispy bottom of like a baozi, like it's just, it kind of is its own like unique texture. And
Mhm.
honestly, largely because a lot of Chinese homes, like in China, don't have ovens. Like you're cooking
Yep.
on the wok. So like if you're making, like if you're in northern China and you have a dough, like it's either getting steamed or it's getting pan fried.
Yep.
So that's kind of, I feel like,
Well
why
said.
it's-
I mean, that makes sense. It's like a very practical answer.
Yeah.
Why that's a category.
Yeah, but obviously delicious. And whenever you go to China, like the first thing I want is like
Is
fried
bread.
dough in any form, and I'm like breakfast of champions.
Okay, dumplings on the spot. Boiled, fried, or steamed? Sarah first. What do you think?
Depends.
Great.
Yes.
Thank you for not answering the question. No, I'm kidding.
I would say if like gut reaction, like gun to my head, it's fried. But I will say that if it kind of depends on the freshness of the dumpling. If your dumpling is like if you just made them,
Yeah.
I would suggest boiling because that's when you really taste the filling.
So
you
well
can really
said, yeah.
taste the juiciness
Yep,
and freshness of the filling. If your dumplings have been sitting in the freezer for like a month or two, then like fried all the way.
Yeah.
Steamed though has its own like vibe. Like they're drier, they're a little bit chewier. It has more of like that al dente kind of thing going on.
Mhm.
So they each have their merits, but I would say fried if I had to choose.
Yeah. Caitlin?
Yeah, you know, I'm a sucker for fried too. Like the chili oil falling over a fried
Mhm.
dumpling is just unparalleled.
I'm with you. I think fried is great, but like when you get like 12 boiled dumplings on a plate and eat them in like 3.5 minutes,
That's true.
such a great feeling.
That's true.
That feeling, right? I want to talk about MSG. We talk about it a bit, you know, here at Taste and very pro MSG. Obviously, here we've written about it many times. I've written about it in Food IQ book I did, but you also have a note in it, so I wanted to bring it up because I still think our listeners might be living in the past, might be living in the dark ages, and still actually think that quote unquote Chinese restaurants.
Syndrome. Or
Yeah,
whatever.
syndrome.
Yeah,
That's what I was trying to think
right,
about. Is
right.
it Chinese restaurant syndrome or
Yep.
to hold the MSG when you're calling for takeout at your place? But like, let's like go there and maybe debunk that bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, like, I'm not going to get into it, but, like, there's, like, really, yeah, it's been debunked by science. Like, there's no negative effects on MSG. I think, you know, it's up to everybody's individual, right? Like, if you have some negative reaction. But I think it's one of those things that can, when it's maligned as much as it is, it kind of like veers into like an unfair characterization of all Chinese food
Definitely.
and all Chinese restaurants and chefs and how they cook. And it's really just like this incredibly amazing flavor amplifier. And it does not take a lot. Like it's like a little pinch here, a little pinch there. It's not like it's, you know, a crazy amount.
MSG makes food taste better
Yeah.
sometimes. I mean, you don't need
Period.
it all the time, right? Like a lot of dishes, you don't need it. But in certain things, like in the book, and that's why we included it in the book, because
Mhm.
there are certain recipes, like a handful, maybe fewer, that we feel like MSG just like pushes this one like a little bit, like just over the edge of like from like good to amazing.
Yeah, to like this umami, right? Like that
Right.
level that we try to reach as home cooks because
Yeah.
oftentimes we underseason our food and we're like, why does it not taste as good as the restaurant?
Right.
Also, like MSG, if you like had that bag of Doritos this morning, like or afternoon or whenever you ate Doritos,
Mhm.
you're eating some MSG.
Yeah, and MSG
Oh,
comes
yeah.
in different forms. Like
Yeah.
disodium guanylate is just another version
Yeah.
of. So people may not see monosodium glutamate in the ingredients,
Mhm.
but there's like another ingredient in there hiding as MSG.
Right.
And I think that yeah, like MSG also occurs naturally in like tomatoes, which is something that
And
we
beef.
and like
Yeah.
Parmesan cheese,
Parm.
and it's
all delicious foods.
all
I
delicious
wonder why.
things. And yeah, I think it's just like it should go from this sort of like idea, like we're advocating for it to be thought of as just another spice in your spice cabinet, just another like tool that you can bring out when you're making like a hot and sour soup, just to like just
Absolutely.
Right,
That's how we write about it here at Taste and in my books because I think it's a great tool and you should buy it. You should buy a bottle or jar of it and experiment and obviously cut it with salt. It's not just going in there like
Right.
without salt. You got to cut it. A lot of people maybe don't know that. You got to cut it,
Yeah,
right?
it's like a finishing ingredient.
Yeah, totally.
It's like the last touch. And I guess like one quick thing is like also like when when it's like, oh, MSG is bad, it kind of just like contributes to like this like weird junk food perception of Chinese food.
Definitely.
And it's like, okay, we're all moving past that. Like, Chinese food is like so much more varied, and it's not just like a greasy late night thing. So, it's time to ditch the negative perceptions around MSG.
Well, we just published this beautiful book about vegan Chinese cooking here.
Yes. Oh my
Clarkson
God.
Potter.
Beautiful book. We just got it. Gorgeous, from Hannah Che.
Yeah,
We're
Hannah
very
Che.
excited to jump into it.
Yeah, it's great. And your book as well. Like, these books are hopefully changing the perception. I mean, the American Chinese food is its own category and lovely, and we love it for many reasons. I'm using love 3 times because who doesn't? But agree fully, like, moving on beyond that is great for everyone.
Yeah.
Let's talk about fried rice, because I think
Yes.
fried rice at home can be one of the easiest things to make, especially if you have some day-old rice around. But I wanted to get either of yours opinion about what are we doing potentially wrong with our fried rice when we like get it and we're like, okay, this doesn't quite hit the way that my favorite Korean restaurant or Chinese restaurant, Japanese restaurant is doing it.
Mhm.
Well, MSG for one.
Yeah.
But also, I would say, not that every restaurant uses it, but I would say the biggest mistake is not preheating the wok properly before you add oil or any other ingredients.
Dry, hot,
A dry,
wok. Yep.
hot wok. And
really, really screaming hot.
yeah, and when your wok is sort of like smoking lightly, that's when you know. And then you pour the oil in, and then it starts to smoke even more, and then you're like, okay, we're good. Let's start. Because basically, what that does is it creates a nonstick surface. So a lot of complaints we get around fried rice, or sort of like questions around it, is like, my rice is sticking. Why is it sticking? I can't get it to not just be this like sticky wet mess. And I think that wok preheating step is key. And then also the other key is not overcrowding. So not trying to put too many ingredients into that wok. Otherwise you're gonna end up with like a wetter kind of end result that doesn't quite have that.
It doesn't have that lightness. So a couple follow-up questions. Which oil are we using for fried rice? Is there like a preferred? Because I know smoke point with olive oil can be quite low
Right.
Yeah.
and not great, though olive oil may work. I don't want to like put
Yeah,
words in
like
your
a
mouth.
light olive oil has a higher smoke point. I feel like
Yeah.
it's designed for that. So it can work, but honestly, like any high smoke point oil that
with
you
a
know,
neutral flavor.
with a neutral flavor is fine. Like you could use peanut oil, which is kind of like a classic Chinese cooking oil, but not necessarily.
canola oil.
Yeah, vegetable.
If
We
you
use
like-
avocado oil.
Avocado oil has a smoke point of like 500 degrees.
It's
Yes.
really, really
Yeah.
great to have
Yeah,
avocado
it's
oil.
really
Yeah.
Absolutely love that.
amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
Any
think
neutral oil. Really.
yeah, and I think that the other thing is like drying out the rice.
Yeah, putting it in your freezer.
Right. Like it can
Yeah.
feel really fussy to be like, oh, I have to dry my rice. And it's like, okay, like if you wanted to make
Great
fresh
fussy voice. Into that. It's a good one.
if you wanted to make fresh rice, and then you have to like, whatever. Like, but it's really just like, and you fluff it out, you let it cool off. You might like spread it out on like a plate or a pan or something, or like, let it sit in the fridge for a few days. Not all of us have that self-control to think ahead to
Yeah.
get the leftover rice, but
Can you pop it in the freezer for like 3 hours?
I've never
I've not tried
I
that,
think
but-
the freezer changes the rice
Yeah.
a bit too much, but
I feel like
because it does like the
it
grains
would break it up. Yeah.
Yeah,
Then you
and
would have
then-
like a broken rice.
It feels a
fried
little
rice.
broken, yeah. I have another question. So I'm sitting and looking at I have like the trinity of garlic, scallions, and ginger. I've got maybe some pork.
Mhm.
I've got vegetables. Like
Mhm.
I've got like root vegetables, carrots potentially. Then I've got leafy vegetables. And then I got my rice. We could like mix and match a bunch of other things. So when do you actually put the rice in? What step?
So the rice. So okay. So you're gonna your oil, your aromatics, then you're adding like whatever like the sort of hard vegetables are. Like if you got carrots going, if you have like any kind of like harder root vegetable that takes a little bit
Broccoli,
longer to
corn,
cook.
not corn, sorry, broccoli, broccoli.
Or if you're using something like that, you could blanch it first so that you don't have to do that. So the rice goes in pretty much right after that. If the pork you've like velveted and you've pre-cooked already,
Yep.
so that's that doesn't go in until later. But yeah, then the rice goes in, and then your seasoning, and then your goal there is to sort of spread the rice around the surface of the wok to heat it through. And then when you see steam rising from the rice, that's when you're like, okay, now I'm ready to finish, and like you're almost done.
Finish with what? Sesame oil?
Yeah, like whatever your
Soy sauce.
yeah,
right.
whatever your
Oil or
sauces
white
are,
peppers.
whatever your
Chili crisp.
It
your
depen-
final
yeah.
ingredients. Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends on the rice, but yeah.
One more Judith question, for a reminder, my friend who's a huge fan and turned me onto Walks of Life. Okay, so one each. Which Chinese dish do you think everyone should learn to make?
That's a good Judith with these
I know,
answers.
right? I was like, I got this at like literally midnight, and I'm like, thank you.
Huh. You know, I feel like I would pick something that's kind of like high on the technique index, like a few more out there ingredients, because I think in an ideal world, like people would, be able to get those ingredients a little bit more easily, and also have an appreciation for things like oyster sauce and things like dark soy sauce and like chili oil that just like have this like very irreplaceable flavor. Like one of our most popular recipes, and honestly might be my answer, is mapo tofu.
Yeah.
Which I feel like, first of all, people love, so they're already kind of like on it. But it has like spicy bean paste and chili oil, and like, we'll get questions of like, oh, I don't have spicy bean paste, like, can I substitute? And it's like, you can substitute, but it's not quite the same.
Please follow the recipe,
Right.
dear reader.
So like
Please follow the
I
recipe.
want everybody to have the enjoyment of
Mhm.
like making it like where they're like, oh my God, wow, this like really tastes the way it should taste. So I feel like a dish like that is good because everybody can kind of like see under the proverbial hood of Chinese cooking, like a little extra challenge.
I
Great
would
call.
say like an everyday, like a stir fry, like a vegetable stir fry that you can adapt to whatever it is, like whatever that like half of a rib of celery left and like the half an onion in your fridge, and you just have all these like random scraps of vegetables in your fridge at the end of the week, and you're like, what do I do with these? And you can make a really delicious mixed vegetable stir fry. And like I know like mixed vegetables sounds super like not super exciting, but I think that it's really I think people will be surprised at how delicious like a bell pepper, a carrot, some celery, and some mushrooms can taste together when you cook them in this way. And how exciting it can taste. And I think, we have a recipe like that on the blog. And I use it all the time to clean out my
I
fridge
feel
at
like
the end of
the
the week.
finer point on that is like how exciting it can taste when it seemingly is just a pile
Clean
of
up.
like,
Yeah.
like
Mop up.
I don't know how appetizing any individual one of these items looks, but then when you like make it into a quick stir fry, you're like, oh my God, I really like pulled a rabbit out of a hat
Let's
here.
go into the flavor profile of this. So you've got your vegetables cooking. So what is the actual like the oomph, the seasoning to it?
It's oyster sauce.
Yes.
Chicken stock really like amps up the flavor of vegetables. If you are trying to go vegetarian, like a mushroom stock or a vegetable stock would also work. And there's also vegetarian oyster sauces as well. And then garlic, maybe a little bit of ginger at the beginning, just to like slices,
like one slice.
just to like
yeah.
infuse the oil a little bit. So you just have like that like whisper of ginger, but you're not like biting into
Yeah,
pieces.
it doesn't
of ginger.
taste like ginger ale. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's basic.
Cool.
And then like a thickener, you're just like thickening it with a little bit of cornstarch
Cornstarch,
slurry just to like bind it all together into a sauce. And yeah.
And a little MSG maybe?
Yeah,
Maybe.
yeah.
Maybe.
Yep.
No, I think it's a really great point about how simple and how like unintimidating
Mm-hmm.
making a stir fry can be.
Yeah.
And without having to go to that like pre-made sauce. Not hating on it, but not the best.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe
it
not.
just unnecessary. It's a better value to buy the individual components of what would go into a pre-made sauce than the pre-made
Into
sauce.
that. I want to talk about the book's design because I think, and your designer who I know, and I'd like to sing her praises because we don't do that enough here on the show, but I love how it flows. I love the use of lines. I just think it's a really well-designed book. Not every book is well-designed, and this one really stands out. So how did that style take shape? And shout out your designer. Let's do it.
Yes. So Jen Wang is our cookbook designer, and she did an incredible job because we could literally have a whole podcast about the design process of this cookbook because it was very tricky. And, you know, from day one when we were talking to prospective publishers, that was like the design was a huge priority for me because this book is all about intuitively conveying this like family story that we're bringing to the table and also this like nostalgia aspect, but also the like Chinese heritage of it all, but we're also trying to make it modern. It's like, and it's from Four Voices.
That's the hardest part, the Four Voices
so
too.
like there's just so many, we were working with so many different constraints and like information hierarchies that we had to wrap into this like beautiful like 320 page book. And you know, like for example, if like I go into like the 4 authors, right? So it's like we were like, okay, like do we use like little pictures of ourselves? Do we use like colors? And ultimately that's what we ended up going with is like kind of different colors for different authors and you know, just trying to like help the reader visualize like not just on with the name, but like see like, oh, this is Bill's recipe, this is Judy's recipe, Sarah's, Caitlin's. So that was a big feat. I think that the other part of it was this idea of like, what does a modern Chinese aesthetic even look like?
100% agree. Really hard to nail that.
It's really tricky because if you like draw like a graph, it's like you could like veer way too far into the like stereotypical visions of China and the Orient, that like people have, or like, you know, kind of like this weird like Microsoft clip art kind of version of like the little takeout box with the chopsticks, which has kind of just been done already a lot, you know, like I think it has its purpose. Like,
it's pretty dope when it's done right.
Like, yeah. But I think it's just one of those, you know, people kind of maybe tune out, right? And then if you go like if you go further into like China and like archetypal Chinese designs, then you're starting to feel like, oh, but where's like the Americanness of it all? So that was incredibly difficult. And, you know, like even in like if you think about it, right, it's like, is it also just Chinese because it was a Chinese artist or a Chinese designer? Like where's the lines of like what looks Chinese? So I think we ended up with like a really beautiful solution, which Jen did many iterations of, and she ended up finding this really beautiful like archival Chinese porcelain design, which is what, you know, you can see kind of running along the top of the book, and it's a theme inside the book. And we took pains also to like in our fabric choices like find like antique Chinese fabrics that would kind of like easily
for the photography, to be clear,
for the backdrops to kind of like convey kind of the tone that we were looking for. But yeah, like a really challenging set of like design issues, and then on top of it all, like kind of making it feel reminiscent of the blog, which also has its own look and feel.
So and all the archival photography really works well too. You have some wonderful photos in there of your family trips.
So that was part of it too, of like making it feel like part photo album, like family photo album almost too.
Well, shout outs to Jen. I think it's a beautiful book. I hope everyone picks it up. I have one more Judith question and then we'll close. So Sarah, take this one. What changes have you seen in the last 20 years or so in terms of the availability of ingredients? And I guess I'll follow it up and say, do you think that it's gotten better, or do we have a long way to go in terms of all home cooks being able to cook your book?
I think it has gotten a lot better. I think a big part of it is, I mean, I'm seeing tofu, medium, firm, soft, and silken in a regular grocery store now, which is like amazing. Like I can walk into like a Stop and Shop and get tofu.
It's rad, and then maybe even fresh tofu, like the Olive Bar. Maybe there'll be a fresh tofu bar.
That would be amazing.
That'd be great.
But yeah, like so I'm seeing more ingredients in the sort of regular grocery stores, and then in terms of like the availability of, I mean, obviously, if you're not living in a large city with like a larger Asian population, these things, that may not be true for you, but there are definitely a lot more sort of e-commerce Chinese ingredients vendors who are like, will ship nationwide,
So cool.
ship your chili oil, ship your like chili crisp. So that's been a huge resource for us because we're constantly getting those questions of like, where do I get this? I don't have like a Chinese grocery store.
And Amazon can be challenging.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, it can get pricey pretty fast.
Pricey, you can
Yeah.
get like weird like quality, you don't know what you're getting. Yeah.
Yeah. So having those Po Wing Hong is a store here in New York, and they ship nationwide dry goods.
Yeah.
So to be like, oh, you're getting ingredients direct from Manhattan, Chinatown. That is a great thing.
Say that again.
Po Wing Hong.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
if you go to, it's powingonline.com.
Yep. And then I'll shout out Kalustyan's online is great.
Yep.
AsianVeggies.com. That's a good site.
Yeah. There's also saywe.com,
Say-we.
justasianfood.com.
Yeah.
There's yamibuy.com, umami cart. There's just like a lot
Yeah.
more of these e-commerce vendors who are shipping Asian ingredients direct to your house. So that's
As I
that's
say,
awesome.
there are people who live in a Chinese food desert where it's
Yep.
like they really just can't, like they're, there's nothing in the surrounding area. So it's really convenient for.
But also maybe like seek out your Asian market, your Korean market, your Chinese market
That's-
too.
yeah.
Because you know, unless you live really in a desert, which may happen, and you go online, it's just gotta like Google.
That's very true. If you just Google like Asian market near me, you'll likely find odds are you'll find one.
Yeah.
And don't feel intimidated. Like I hear a lot of our readers are like, oh, I just felt really intimidated to go in there, and I didn't know, I wasn't sure what I should get or if I should be, And I think that was a big goal on our blog to, like, with our ingredients glossary, to give people the information to feel confident when they walk into that store. Like, here's what I need to get for this recipe. And, like, I'm going to go home and I'm going to cook it. And, I feel like that is such a big part of the blog, in addition to the recipes, is just like the knowledge around the ingredients and what to do with them.
And listen, like every grocery store has crabby attendants and shopkeepers, but listen, like if you go up to somebody and ask a question, I've usually encountered a very positive experience. I've had a positive
Yeah,
experience.
and a lot of readers are like, I just show them the picture from the blog,
Yeah.
and then
That's
they'll
awesome.
take me right to it. So that's also
Absolutely.
an option.
Yeah, go visit your local supermarket. It's fun. It's a great experience.
Yeah.
Okay, we asked our guests on the Taste Podcast. There was a dream food book or cookbook project that you could work on without the burden of time, meaning you have no deadline, or the burden of budget, meaning you have unlimited funds to make it happen. What would that book be? I'm going to give each of you the opportunity to answer this. So, Sarah, you first.
Okay, so for me, this would be a book where we traveled to China. Me, my whole family, my parents, and my sister, and we just went to like random villages and found like the best cook in that village and just like asked them to like teach us. And then I would love to just like include all these people's stories in the book, and really just make it an exploration of like Chinese regional home cooking, because you have like, even in China, you have like your restaurant food, and then you have like the home food.
Yeah.
The like, it's
Right.
农家菜 is what it's called in Chinese, like sort of like country or like the sort of Chinese equivalent of like farm to table. And that is like sort of like the soul, like it's like soulful cooking.
And there's great YouTubes that cover this style of cooking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would love to do that, just to go to different provinces
I think
and learn
that's-
from people.
I hope it's in the works. Caitlin, how about yourself?
So I think it would be interesting to do like a catalog of different, like the Chinese diaspora, the Chinese food diaspora, of how Chinese cooking and flavors are interpreted based on like local preference. So like if you think about like East Coast versus like West
Yeah.
Coast Chinese American food, like it's really different. Like in here in the Northeast, like a thing that used to be more common is like getting those little like fried wonton strip chips with like the duck sauce like at the table, and like we wrote a post about it, and like people like not from the Northeast were like, I've never seen that. And we were like, oh my God, what? So, you know, there's just like within America, there's variation. Like if you go to like the UK or like India or like really anywhere.
Yeah, Indo-Chinese food. It's just like how like Chinese food has been like assimilated in all of the places it has.
Exactly. I feel like that would be a cool project.
I think both of these could be great. They could be individual. They could be unified in a cool way.
Yeah.
Sarah and Caitlin, thank you for joining the Taste Podcast.
Thank you so much.
This was awesome.
Yeah, this was great.
The Taste Podcast is hosted by me, Matt Rodbard. It's produced by Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening.